You know, it's funny. Some words just never seem to cooperate with me, no matter how hard I try. I'm talking about those words that just twist your tongue into knots,
Right.
those linguistic landmines that make you question your entire existence.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Yeah.
The fascinating world of English pronunciation.
It really is fascinating.
To the jungle out there.
It is. You would think that with all the technology and resources we have today,
Right.
mastering pronunciation would be easy.
You would think.
But English seems to delight in its irregularities.
Absolutely. And we've got all this amazing material from linguistic experts really digging into why this language seems determined to trip us up. And more importantly, we're going to unearth some practical steps to make those sounds we stumble over a little less, well, stumble-worthy.
The thing about English is, unlike some languages that kind of play by the rules, our pronunciation rarely matches the spelling on the page.
It's true.
It's enough to make your head spin.
English almost feels like it went on a linguistic world tour, picking up souvenirs from every language it encountered.
It did.
But there's got to be a reason for this beautiful mess, right?
There is. It's a history buff's dream, actually.
Okay.
English has its roots in Germanic languages,
Okay.
but was heavily influenced by French, Latin, and even Greek along the way.
Wow.
All those influences left their mark, not just on our vocabulary, but on how we pronounce words.
So it's like a linguistic melting pot where the recipe got a little muddled along the way.
Exactly.
No wonder it's so tricky.
And this is where things get interesting.
Okay.
Because of this history, English has a staggering number of phonemes,
Okay.
those individual units of sound,
Right.
far more than many other languages.
Wow.
And some of these sounds simply don't exist in other languages, which is a major hurdle for learners.
Okay, so that explains why some sounds like the dreaded "the"
Yes.
feel like a completely foreign concept to our mouths.
Precisely. The "the" sound, for example, requires very specific tongue placement
I bet.
that can feel utterly alien to speakers of languages without it.
Yeah.
It's like asking your tongue to do gymnastics.
Tongue yoga.
Yeah.
If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to like the video. Share it with friends who might find it helpful. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next video. Let us know in the comments what topic you'd like to hear.
So we've established that English pronunciation is like this linguistic puzzle box with a mind of its own.
Yeah.
But let's break down some of these specific challenges
Okay.
that our experts have identified.
Yeah.
What are some of the common traps that people fall into?
Well, you touched on one earlier, those pesky silent letters.
Oh, yeah.
They're everywhere, lurking in words you'd never suspect.
It's true.
Like they're playing hide and seek with our pronunciation.
You think you've finally gotten a handle on a word and then bam, on a silent K jumps out of nowhere.
Right.
It reminds me of this article I read about the word debt.
Uh,
Did you know that B has been silently judging us for centuries, all thanks to a 15th century scholar who thought it made the word look more sophisticated?
oh, absolutely. And it's not just debt. Think about Night Sovereign Island.
Right.
These silent letters are like ghosts of pronunciation past, remnants of earlier forms of English and its influences.
It's amazing how these linguistic quirks have survived for centuries.
I know.
But silent letters are just the tip of the iceberg, right?
Right. Our sources dive into consonant clusters.
Okay.
Those combinations of consonants that seem specifically designed to tie your tongue in knots.
Oh, those are the worst.
Yes.
Words like strengths or sixths,
Yeah.
they sound like a mouthful even when you're just thinking about them.
Exactly. They can be real tongue twisters.
Yeah.
And they often trip up learners because the way these sounds blend together is very specific to English. It's like trying to fit puzzle pieces from different sets together. They just don't quite mesh.
So it's not just about pronouncing the individual sounds correctly, but also about mastering the way they flow together in English.
You've got it. And speaking of flow, we can't forget about stress and intonation.
Right.
This is where English truly becomes an art form. Oh, absolutely. I've always said English is like music.
Yes.
It's not just what you say, but how you say it.
I love that analogy. One of our expert linguists describes it as the melody of language.
Okay.
You can say the exact same words,
Right.
but change the emphasis or tone and the entire meaning shifts.
It's like that classic example. I didn't say she stole the money.
Right.
Depending on which word you stress, you could be expressing surprise, anger, or even defending yourself.
Precisely. And this is where things can get really tricky for learners.
Okay.
In many languages, word stress is fairly consistent,
Right.
but in English, it can feel completely random.
And then there are those subtle shifts in intonation that can completely change the mood of a sentence.
Yes.
It's like adding punctuation to your spoken words.
Exactly.
It's amazing how much nuance there is to English intonation.
But enough doom and gloom about the challenges. I'm ready for some solutions.
Right.
What can we actually do to improve our pronunciation?
That's the spirit.
Yeah.
And luckily, our expert sources are chock full of practical techniques.
Okay.
One that really stood out to me is this idea of phonetic training.
Okay.
It sounds a bit intimidating, but it's actually quite straightforward.
Phonetic training, does that involve those charts with all the strange symbols I vaguely remember from high school language classes?
Exactly. It involves getting familiar with the International Phonetic Alphabet,
Oh, yeah.
or IPA.
Okay.
Think of it like learning the secret code behind English sounds.
Okay, so instead of battling those unpredictable spellings, the IPA gives us a consistent way to, see the sound.
It's like having subtitles for spoken language, showing you exactly how to position your tongue and mouth to make those tricky sounds.
Oh.
And the great thing is there are tons of online resources and language apps that use IPA to help you practice.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not just about hearing the sounds, but also training your mouth to actually form them correctly.
Yes,
Are there any other techniques that these experts recommend?
absolutely. One that I've always found incredibly effective is the shadowing technique.
Shadowing as in mimicking someone's speech.
Precisely. It's like their vocal shadow trying to match their rhythm, intonation, and pronunciation as closely as possible.
Right.
You basically find a short audio clip, like a podcast or a video, and try to repeat it simultaneously with the speaker.
So it's like karaoke for pronunciation.
Exactly. It might feel a bit awkward at first,
Yeah.
but it's like muscle memory for your mouth.
Yeah.
You're training yourself to produce those sounds naturally without overthinking it.
It's like you're absorbing the music of the language, not just the words themselves.
Exactly. Another technique that sounds deceptively simple but is surprisingly effective is focusing on mouth and tongue placement.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
We often don't think about the physicality of speaking another language.
Right. We tend to focus on the sounds themselves, but those sounds are created by very specific movements of our tongue lips and even our jaw.
Wow.
One of our experts even recommends practicing in front of a mirror,
Really?
exaggerating those mouth movements at first to get a feel for them.
It's like learning a new dance, but for your mouth.
Exactly. And speaking of training our ears, there's a technique called minimal pairs practice. It involves distinguishing between words that differ by just one sound, like ship and sheep, or leave and live.
It's like those spot the difference games, but for your ears.
Yes.
That sounds challenging, but also a fun way to fine-tune your listening skills.
Exactly. And it really works by training yourself to hear those subtle differences.
If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to like the video. Share it with friends who might find it helpful. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next video. Let us know in the comments what topic you'd like to hear.
You'll be better equipped to pronounce them correctly yourself.
This has all been incredibly helpful, but what about those times when we hit a plateau? It's easy to feel discouraged when you feel like you're not making progress.
Sure.
Any advice from the experts on how to stay motivated?
Absolutely. Our experts emphasize that plateaus are a normal part of the learning process.
Okay.
They recommend focusing on consistency over intensity.
Okay.
Even short bursts of practice done regularly are more effective than sporadic attempts.
So it's like building any other skill, consistency is key.
Exactly. They also recommend prioritizing the most common sounds first instead of getting bogged down by obscure sounds you rarely encounter.
Right.
Focus on mastering the sounds that make the biggest difference in everyday conversation.
It's about working smarter, not harder.
Precisely. And most importantly, be patient with yourself.
Yes.
Learning a new language, especially its pronunciation, takes time and effort. Celebrate the small victories and enjoy the journey.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. It's amazing how much goes on behind the scenes of something we often take for granted, like pronunciation.
I agree.
It's been great unpacking these fascinating insights with you.
It has been a pleasure.
And for our listeners, here's a final thought to ponder. We've explored all these intricacies of English pronunciation, but how often do we stop to consider how our own perceptions of accents are shaped? Do we favor certain accents over others, and if so, why? It's a question worth reflecting on. Until next time, keep practicing and embracing the beautiful complexity of language.